Okay, well, I'm just going to start so we don't waste time in this hour that we have. Welcome to the first installment of the 2021 Student Affairs webinar series as part of the Society for Conservation Biology North America Student Affairs Subcommittee. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Melissa Cronin. I'm a PhD student at UC Santa Cruz studying ecology and evolutionary biology, and I'm the student representative to the board of SCBNA. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about what that acronym means and who we are. Before I do so, I just want to acknowledge that I'm speaking to you here from unceded ancestral homeland of the Ramaytush Ohlone, who are the original inhabitants of the San Francisco Peninsula. As the indigenous stewards of this land and in accordance with their traditions, the Ohlone have never ceded, lost, nor forgotten their responsibilities as the caretakers of this place, as well as for all peoples who reside in their traditional territory. And as guests, we, or I in this place, recognize that I benefit from living and working on their traditional homeland, and I hope to pay respects by acknowledging the ancestors, elders, and relatives of this community. Okay, I'm gonna share my screen, and I'll only talk for a couple of minutes and we'll get to our amazing panelists. Okay, you can see that, right? Oh, it's not really full screen, but hopefully that's good enough. Okay, so like I said, this is the first of our 2021 webinar series. And today we're going to talk about what we're calling non-traditional careers in academia, which you can interpret sort of liberally, but that's what we're using today. And I want to just give a little background on SCBNA, which is, like I said, Society for Conservation Biology North America. We have a student affairs subcommittee, which is putting on this webinar today and the ones that will follow it. And we're really just a group of mostly PhD, master's students, but we're totally welcome to other students, undergrads, who meet sort of semi-regularly and are putting on a series of webinars. I really hope that you are interested in some of these other topics that we have coming down the pipe. And the first in particular, we have a date for. So the upcoming webinars include careers outside of academia, agency and consulting firms. That's going to be on February 16th at 12 PT. You'll get an email, but if you're one of those people who likes to put it in their calendar, go right ahead. We also have a webinar on conservation in practice, equity and inclusion in conservation and research, and conservation and social science. I think those will have more snazzy titles, but those are the topics that we're going for. If you're interested in joining the subcommittee, we are actively looking for new members. You can email me at mecronin@ucsc.edu. And like I said, this is a subcommittee of the of SCBNA, which is a part of the Society for Conservation Biology. And just because folks might be interested in getting more involved in SCB as a whole, here's a couple of things you can do if that's your case. You can join a section, a working group, and a chapter or a chapter. You can network in Conservation Connection online. You can subscribe to the 3 journals. You can become a member of the board. You can get conference and publishing discounts and so much more. So you can check out these links for more information. I'm happy to share these slides if people want, if they don't get to put down these links. And I'm gonna hand it over to my co-host, Kelly Keene, in just a moment, but I just want to express my thanks to our 3 panelists, amazing panelists. I feel really lucky to be hearing from you all today. And just give a brief background on why we're here, which is that, a lot of us in grad school or post-grads or postdocs are sort of interested in careers in academia. But in fact, I just read yesterday that only 3% of people graduating with a PhD go into tenure track faculty positions, which to me, statistically, is not promising. However, it really is important to acknowledge that there are all these other pathways through and inside of academia, and I think we forget those sometimes. So I'm super excited and thankful to our panelists, and I will turn it over to you, Kelly, to introduce them.
Thanks, Mel. So as Mel had said, we're going to have Robin Dunkin, Elliott Hazen, and Jessica Pratt speaking with us today. So Our first speaker is going to be Robin Dunkin. Robin studies the physiological ecology of large marine and terrestrial vertebrates and now applies the scientific method to improving undergraduate science education. Robin completed her master's degree at the University of North Carolina and received her PhD from the University of California, Santa Cruz. After finishing her postdoc with NOAA and working closely with the STEM teaching community, Robin was hired as an assistant teaching professor at UC Santa Cruz. Robin is keenly interested in incorporating STEM practices into both large lecture and active learning versions of her courses to help all students improve core science process skills, bolster STEM identity, and reach their full potential. Take it away, Robin.
Hello, welcome everyone, and thank you to Melissa and Kelly for the invitation to come and talk with all of you. The non-traditional career is a little bit of a passion of mine because I feel like I was one of those people that was on the strict research type career path, and then I kind of had some experiences in grad school that opened up other doors for me that I realized suited me better. So I thought I would kind of give you the brief recap of how I came to be in the position that I'm in. And then I'll tell you a little bit about what the day-to-day life is like in the position that I hold now. And I'll keep it short because I think the most valuable time will be from questions that you all have, is answering those questions. So I wanted to be a marine biologist from early days. I didn't even know what grad school was when I was in high school. My parents, I'm a first-gen student, and I had a high school teacher that recommended going to Santa Cruz. So I ended up in Santa Cruz as an undergraduate and got involved in undergraduate research and was really excited about it. I did a senior thesis. I loved it. I ended up going to do my master's degree on the other side of the country at the University of North Carolina in Wilmington. And I spent 2 years studying dolphin blubber, which was really fun. You can spend 2 whole years studying blubber. It's kind of amazing. And I loved it. And I was really immersed in the research community, and I had a great experience in that lab. I decided to then do a PhD back in Santa Cruz and move away from marine mammals, but move into large terrestrial mammals. So I ended up working on physiology of elephants, not the seals, but the actual big elephants with the trunks. And I really enjoyed that experience, but throughout this entire time, so master's degree, even as an undergraduate, a senior undergraduate, I was TAing, and I was getting to interact with undergraduates. I was teaching in other ways too. I was doing a lot of public outreach type programs. And I really loved it. I felt, kind of a lot of passion around helping other people, come to love the things that I loved about ecology and about biology and physiology. In my PhD, I had the opportunity to start lecturing and actually being an instructor of record for our big intro bio course, and I would teach half of that class a few quarters in a row, and I loved it. It really it kind of fit me like a glove, and it was a little bit surprising, but I really loved it. And I went through a lot of kind of soul searching over a few years, and I came to realize that while I really loved research, I felt like what got me up in the morning was interacting with students. And so it took, I will certainly admit that it took a little bit of a frame shift in my head to admit that maybe the research track wasn't where I wanted to be. But once I really fully accepted that, I realized that I love teaching, and I have just become more and more immersed in the science of teaching, the equity and inclusion aspects of teaching that I feel really are so important, and they've come into more relief this year than ever before in the last year. And I get to see the payoff of my efforts every single day. And I think that was something that was somewhat hard for me in research, was that I didn't get to see the payoff. I would toil for years and years and years, publish papers, and maybe somewhere along the line, someone would benefit from this dissertation that I did, right? And I think if I had maybe been a different person, a different personality, that would have been okay with me. And maybe I would have pursued a more conservation bent, for example, in that work. But I was just really smitten with teaching by that point. And so I ended up working as a lecturer for a few years in our department, while I also did other work. And then this position, this teaching professor position, came up in 2017. And I was so fortunate to apply for that and be hired. So I wanted to tell you a little bit about what the day-to-day life is like at our university. Jessica can probably tell you a little bit more about what that's like at UC Irvine. My role, and one thing that's really great about the teaching professor role, is that it's pretty flexible. It can look different in different places and in different departments. In my role, I do a lot of faculty development. So while my first priority is my students and infusing evidence-based pedagogy, for example, in my classes, my other big hat is to be an agent of change across our entire campus for infusing all of our courses and our whole culture of teaching with best practices. And so I work as the assistant faculty director of our teaching center. And in that role, I do lots of workshops for faculty. I work with graduate students. I consult on grants. And I do one-on-one consultations with faculty. So people will come to me and say, I'm having this challenge in my class. Do you have any ideas on how we can fix it? Or maybe they want to revamp their course and they want to know where to start. So that's the kind of thing I can help with. And one other thing I wanted to bring up is that I think one thing people think about when they think about this position is they think, well, doesn't it get boring to teach the same class every single quarter for like 20 years? And I have to say that I kind of worried about that too, but in a way it's actually really freeing because I do teach the same class so frequently. I get the gratification of making tweaks and seeing them work or not work each quarter. And I get to see, new students come in, and I really get to hone my craft in a way that's much more difficult when you teach the same class maybe once a year, right? And so I don't find it boring. I find it a really refreshing challenge to go out and find new research papers that I can incorporate. It helps keep me grounded in my own discipline. And I think as I said, I feel like I get to really see the payoff of the effort and work that goes into crafting a really great class. And also, it's such a wonderful time to be in teaching. I mean, there's this awakening going on across the country, in part because of the pandemic, but it was also starting before that, about the very important role that education plays, especially in Research 1 universities. For a long time, teaching was sometimes not as valued as research, but I think that across the country that is starting to kind of shake out. I'd love to hear what Jessica thinks about that too at UC Irvine, but certainly across the UCs, we're seeing a really big change in that way. One thing I think that also makes my position really gratifying is that my colleagues really value it. And I think that makes a big difference in the experience that people have in the teaching professor role. Our university really values teaching, and our department in particular really values teaching. And so that's made my experience really positive. I think that's it.
Awesome. That was really great, Robin. Thank you. So our second speaker is Elliott Hazen. Elliott's general research interests fall in the realm of ecology and ecological modeling, with an added interest in predator-prey relationships, scale, and oceanographic forcing. He received his master's from the University of Washington School of Aquatic and Fisheries Sciences and PhD from Duke University. He currently works at NOAA's Southwest Fisheries Science Center in Monterey, California, and is also an associate researcher and assistant adjunct professor at the University of California, Santa Cruz. In his research, he uses novel technologies such as fisheries acoustics, biologging tags, and oceanographic data paired with spatial statistics to examine predator ecology. Take it away, Elliott.
Awesome. Can you guys all see my screen? Just thumbs up. Okay, I have a weird position in that I am within NOAA, but wasn't willing to completely divorce myself from the academic sphere. So I still have a affiliation with UC Santa Cruz, and most recently also with Hopkins Marine Station. So I can talk a little bit about these adjunct positions because they were not very either transparent on how I got them, and also just in some cases not that easy to get, particularly the one with Hopkins. So my research focuses, as Kelly mentioned, I don't need to go too much into it, but I'm part of a broader group, lab group here that is an amalgamation of federal folks and UC Santa Cruz employees as well. So that's just to show kind of the broad view here. But I have one slide that I was just going to kind of walk through, if I can make it work, here, a little about how I got here. So this is a fun one. I'll just say I spent about 2 hours late at night the other night looking through photos, so I appreciated the opportunity to do this. But there is a photo of me on a computer. It's before color existed, I guess, in the world. I want to say that was probably like 1986 or so. And just to highlight, I was involved with computers. My mom actually did a lot of work with computing, so it was something I was exposed to and involved with from an early stage. I then went to college at Duke University and was lucky enough to both go to the Duke University Marine Lab, and then even on this, I did a REU program at Chesapeake Bay Biological Labs, which is the sailing picture from the left there. Really kind of helped me realize how much I love field work and drinking Corona in the field, I guess. But just being able to get out and understand how the marine world works. So I ended up doing a master's at University of Washington, and the bottom, kind of the bottom two pictures. So that's me figuring out how fisheries acoustics is affected by the biology and behavior of fish in, I think that's Newport, Oregon is my guess by looking at it. And then a research cruise I did in the Bering Strait, or Shelikof Strait actually, with holding a grenadier there in my hands. So the top one, I did some work in the Gulf of Mexico for my PhD, and actually missed my dissertation defense, or not defense, my hooding ceremony by being in the Antarctic with Pat Halpin there at Duke. So he hooded me in Antarctica as my graduation. So the reason I show this is it's actually funny because through all these field pictures, the one in the top left is more commonly what I do on a day-to-day, if not month-to-month basis, particularly even before COVID, though, but particularly now. And I was very much trained that an academic job was wanted to be and where I was going to end up. And I ended up the NRC postdoc that was what brought me to Monterey, or Pacific Grove at the time, really opened my eyes to what government work was like. And it was interesting, even when I did that, I didn't really fully feel that government was the right place for me. But then I proceeded to have 2 kids, or at least 1 kid at the time, and now have 2, and really valued the both understanding and consideration of a typical 9-to-5 job, not expectations of working 60-hour work weeks, as well as just the job security. So one thing that I wasn't even that aware of before I started applying to faculty positions was that I get paid 12 months out of the year as a federal scientist, whereas a lot of academic positions, it's a 9-month appointment. So you can still get the other 3 months through grants and things like that, but it's nice, again, with a family, having a little bit of job security on that front. Hopefully some of the downsides of government life are probably pretty obvious. The past 4 years were not fun in a lot of ways, particularly trying to do research on climate change and knowing that, different aspects. Friends of mine were on the National Climate Assessment that Trump was trying to get fired, frankly. And just a lot of those, the political swingings of the federal government can be quite frustrating from a day-to-day perspective. I feel like I would do a lot of busy work, but I don't know how different that is from an academic perspective. I think that's just unfortunately part of the life. I still, though, am surprised that top left picture is more me. I wish I were out in the field a little bit more, but it is one of those things that I think in many careers, as you transition, you get away from field work, but within NOAA, it's been particularly noticeable to me. There's opportunities occasionally for me to go in the field, but it's not a significant part of my day-to-day duties or my job. Trying to think, I think I have one other comment I was going to make about the NOAA versus academia. Oh, the adjuncts. So yeah, so the cool thing is before I started at NOAA, I actually had an appointment at UC Santa Cruz. And so I was able to kind of roll that relationship and a lot of the collaborations I had there into this adjunct appointment. And what's been really nice about that is it's allowed me to co-teach courses, co-advise students, and just kind of be generally involved with people's, the scientific research. And that's really been one of those kind of lifelines to me, to be able to talk science when I'm dealing with my 12 hours of online training on how to avoid landmines, for example, when traveling internationally. Yes, that's actually a training that we have to do as a federal scientist. The Hopkins one was a bit more different. They didn't have a traditional pathway to that, but it was really nice because working with students, they actually pushed for me to kind of advance the process and get that adjunct appointment. And so it's been really nice, and it's very telling for me to be able to see how different kind of the two academic structures at Santa Cruz and Hopkins work, and yet be able to kind of participate in both realms. So the other thing I'll say is, the other thing about the federal job that I did not expect, but I remember in academia talking about doing applied science, usually, and I think this one, Robin pointed to this as well, you write a paper and then hope that, about how important it is to apply your science to conservation, and you hope it gets kind of taken up. And I'll say that's another advantage of being in the federal government, is I work very closely with the West Coast Regional Office, who implements the policy side of NIMS science. And if they have a need, like, hey, we're having a really high number of bycatch of the species, I can build a science tool that can directly inform management. And that's something that has been particularly rewarding, from my end. So I think that was all I have. So I will stop sharing and hand it back over now.
Awesome. That was really great, Elliott. So our third speaker is going to be Jessica Pratt. Jessica is a community ecologist broadly interested in research and education in the applied fields of conservation biology and restoration ecology. She completed her bachelor's degree in biology at Grand Valley State University, a master's degree in zoology from North Carolina State University, and PhD from the University of California, Irvine in ecology and evolutionary biology. Jessica is currently an assistant teaching professor in ecology and evolutionary biology at UC Irvine and teaches courses in a campus-wide minor in global sustainability and a master's in conservation and restoration science program. She's conducted research on animal behavior, tropical bird foraging ecology, the conservation value of tropical agricultural ecosystems, the dynamics of butterfly species range shifts in response to climate change, and most recently, the effects of plant species responses to environmental change on associated animal communities. Her teaching experience spans middle school up to the university graduate level, and she has taught courses ranging from genetics to conservation biology. Take it away, Jessica.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for that introduction. I related so much to what Robin and Elliott shared about their journeys and different aspects of their positions. And I think highlighting some of the trade-offs associated with our different jobs. And so I'll just tell you a little bit about myself and my journey, and then look forward to questions. So I am also, like Robin, a first-generation college student growing up in Michigan, and I was really interested in spending time in nature and finding a position where I got to spend a lot of time outside. That was ultimately an early goal of mine. So I pursued field biology, and like Elliott, now spend most of my time in front of a computer, which I think in part just comes with a PhD in whatever field you're in. And so I moved to Irvine in 2005 after finishing my master's degree. And when I moved here, I began adjuncting at community colleges and was working as a research technician, a lab and field technician at UCI on a part-time basis. And I had the opportunity to be a lecturer at UCI and really fell in love with teaching at that point. I entered the PhD program at UCI in part because I wanted a teaching career, and I wasn't sure if I wanted that to be at a sort of formal education institution, or I was also very interested in nonprofit education work, but at like a high director sort of level. And so the PhD in ecology and evolutionary biology was a path for me to get to those types of careers. And as I was finishing my PhD, I wasn't set on a teaching job in a particular type of institution. So I was very open to thinking about nonprofit, the nonprofit education world, and doing sort of community education and outreach, as well as formal teaching. I had a lot of experience in what I guess you could think of as program development. I had developed a lot of skills in program development, although at the time I wouldn't have called it that. They ended up being these transferable skills. And so shortly after moving to Irvine, I co-founded an Orange County chapter of the Society for Conservation Biology, and I've been involved in the Society for Conservation Biology ever since. I'm currently on the board of SCB North America, and so I'd been involved in this kind of world of building programs and building capacity, planning events, being involved in conferences, thinking about program strategy, and working on a lot of networking with environmental nonprofits. And so when my current job was advertised at UCI, it was really unique. I thought it was really unique in that the first couple of years, I was spending half of my time developing a new master's program at UC Irvine. So we have a professional program in conservation and restoration science, and there was a lot of interest in developing a new degree program, and then also completely revamping an undergraduate minor in global sustainability. And so after I finished my PhD, I was working sort of as a postdoc, but it was, I think my title was like an administrative assistant, designing undergraduate level internships in environmental biology. And through that, I had done a lot of network and relationship building with the local environmental community and practitioner community that I knew would be really essential in developing a very applied professional master's program. And so I applied for the faculty position that was advertised at UCI a couple months before I defended my PhD. And I just thought, oh, this is my dream job, but it's way too soon. Like, I just need another year. I have to go somewhere else, right? Like, you have to go before you can come back. But I had my first child by then. I was married. My husband had a good job locally. So the going somewhere for a year or two wasn't actually very desirable at that time. I got the job. I think what helped was that I really did have this strong network with local organizations and people who would really help inform the kind of capacity building of the programs at UCI. And so in my first couple of years, I was teaching only half to like 2/3 time of what would be a typical course load. So for me, the minimum course load is 2 full classes every single quarter. So 6 across the year, but I teach a lot of classes that are not full classes. And so it's interesting how to count these things that are different kind of unit values. And then I spend a lot of the rest of my time administering these programs. The first couple of years, I was really involved in researching applied master's programs, looking at professional programs, what kinds of curricula are offered, what are the experienced students need, doing surveys, visiting with practitioners, figuring out what are the skills and knowledge that our graduates are going to need to know to get jobs, like with NOAA or agencies or nonprofits or consulting firms. And so that was really fun. I'm a pretty outgoing and extroverted person. And so I like doing that relationship building and getting to investigate these programs. And then putting the proposal together was really exciting because I got to design a program that where I knew that I would be really passionate about working with and training these students going forward in my career if the program was successful. What I underestimated was how much involvement there would continue to be after that initial building stage that no longer counted as one of those sort of teaching release aspects of my job. So going into year 3 as a professor, I had a full teaching load. And unlike Robin, I do not teach the same class more than once a year. And that was exciting at first, right? Because I'm not going to get bored. But now when I'm prepping for a class I teach once a year and there's a topic that's a little, tangential to my area of expertise, I'm like, oh no, I have no idea what's happened in the field in the last year. And there's a lot of work that has to go into just staying kind of caught up with my own material. But I do have the privilege of teaching a lot of smaller upper division specialty classes in sustainability, field ecology, graduate level conservation biology, and professional development courses for our master's program. And so that's really exciting. I do get to know the students really well and build multiple quarter, multiple year relationships, which is something that is really exciting because as Robin mentioned, I likewise found the research aspect of academia not as rewarding as teaching. I struggled a lot with my own identity as a researcher, someone who could write proposals and would have novel ideas, where teaching, I felt like an instant gratification is very energizing, and developing relationships with students that go out and do amazing work, I could see a big impact of my teaching work live on in my students. And it was harder for me to make that kind of impactful connection to any of the research opportunities that I sort of felt capable of at the time. So I do feel like at UCI, my colleagues really value folks who are in the teaching series. But a lot of the administrative work that comes from my involvement both in the master's program, anything, and with the minor in global sustainability, which is really interdisciplinary, I definitely struggle to have those things valued because I think the overarching impression of my position is that we should be contributing primarily to our undergraduate majors through our teaching of large courses. That's more typical for this type of position. And I'm not doing that kind of more typical thing in the role that I'm in. So it makes it a little bit of a harder sell, I think. But we have so many centers and interdisciplinary institutes that are popping up at universities, all over the globe. And so we have to figure out how much to value all of that community engagement that's so important in bringing our science to the public and increasing understanding. And so I think there's a lot of effort trying to figure out how to do that. How do we reward all those aspects of the job that are maybe not typical or that don't check a box? And so that's one thing I would say is a struggle for people who are in non-traditional academic positions, is how our structures are set up to understand and promote those kinds of jobs. So I think I've gone for 10 minutes, and there's a lot more. I'll add one more thing just in case it's of interest. I also am the co-director of our STEM teacher preparation program at UCI, so representing the School of Biological Sciences. So separately from what I talked about, I do work during the summer to make up for that 9-month salary, running some research programs for community college students who are transferring to UCI to train as STEM teachers. So it's sort of like a demystifying the ideas of research for future teachers. And so there can, and I'm excited to be able to do some of those one-off summer opportunities that I might not be able to do if I had a 12-month commitment. So there's the trade-off there.
Thanks, Jessica. That was really great. So I think we're going to open it up for questions now. I think you can either use the raise your hand feature or type your message or question into the comment or message box, and we can read those off.
I just have to comment. I don't know if you guys noticed this, but we all three have ties to North Carolina, so go North Carolina.
I know, that popped up. I was, yeah. I was
Crazy.
thinking about that too.
Fine. We have a question in the chat. What was a key experience, to all the speakers, what was a key experience between your bachelor's and secondary degree that helped launch you into that second degree?
I can say a little bit about what I did. I took a year off and worked as a sea otter biologist after my undergrad, and that was really pretty transformative. It also led me to decide to do a master's degree, because at the time I was really torn between going to vet school and grad school. And I decided that 2 years of a master's degree was probably worth making sure that I was sure before going off to a PhD. So I feel like someone mentioned REUs in the chat, and I feel like that was sort of my year-long REU. It was brutal. I mean, it was like the kind of job where I was spending, we were doing like 24-hour activity budgets on sea otters, and my job was mostly to do the night shift. And so I was like traipsing all over middle of California, you know, tracking sea otters in the middle of the night. And it was fun, but also pretty brutal. And getting through that, I was like, okay, if I can make it through this and still like research, then I guess research is probably a good thing to do.
I was going to say quickly, interestingly, I did the master's route as well. The REU, if you don't know, is research experience for undergrads. The one I did at Chesapeake Biological Labs ended up being with like one of the founding fathers of early life history, Ed Hood, and just opened my eyes to what science was in many ways. I'd say that I did not get during my undergrad career. So that also gave me a step up, because he wrote me recommendation letters that were really, really valuable. So yeah, I would just agree with that. The nice thing about the master's is you can always, it takes longer if you do master's and then a PhD, but you can always shift, which is something I did between UW and Duke, and I was happy I did.
I took 3 years off in between my master's and PhD, and I did a lot of volunteering and took some natural history courses and worked as a lab technician doing research, both in the lab and in the field, and adjuncting. And so for me, that 3-year period was what really helped me solidify what I wanted to do. So when I entered the PhD, it was like, okay, I'm confident, like I need this, I know where I'm going. And so that was really critical. There's a lot of questions here. Should I read the next one?
Yeah, or I think Amanda has had her hand up. Do you want to kick us off, Amanda?
Sure. I guess if, there are a lot of questions, so I'll try to keep it brief, but I guess it's a bit broad anyway. So I just appreciate this. It's like perfect right now, especially in these like really unsure times. But I have been doing like biology tech. I've been a technician for, now it's coming on 5 years. I didn't intend to do that. I wanted to go into grad school and do, you know, hardcore research, but I've been kind of like stuck in this limbo. And now I'm really like itching to know, I think I really am drawn to the environmental education side of things, and the outreach, working in Latin America has really like drawn me towards wanting to bring inclusivity and cultural relevance and things like this into the research experience. So I don't know. It's so hard to know. Like, it's scary to think about leaving the hardcore R1 like research path. Should I choose something that's definitely like an ecology evolutionary research graduate program, or should I go into research education like right off the bat, or something that's more interdisciplinary? I guess that's my, like, what your guys' experiences were and what you would recommend at this point, because I have a lot of time since my undergrad.
I can just comment, and maybe Jessica probably has some ideas about this too, I would imagine, from her work in the master's program. But I have served now on like 4 or 5 committees to hire teaching professors. And there's multiple pathways to that education piece of it. What I have found is that if you're looking to work in an academic type position as a teaching person, right, whatever role that is, but if it's going to be more in the education piece, my experience, and I fully recognize that there's going to be a broad variety of experiences with this, but the experience that I've had is that in working with faculty, it really helps that my PhD is in hardcore science. We talk the same language. They respect that I come from their world. I can translate between edu jargon world and you know, ecology or evolution or physiology. And so when you're doing your PhD, and I do a lot of this, Melissa will attest, I work with grad students a lot to help develop pedagogy for grad students. And we have come a long way at our university in recognizing that graduate students are our future faculty and they need that training. And so my advice would be that whatever graduate program you end up in, you take advantage of all of the opportunities around getting that pedagogy experience under your belt. And like Melissa said at the beginning, academic jobs are really competitive. And so most hiring committees are going to want to see pretty good credentials in that teaching column, in addition to the research credentials. So it never hurts to do that, regardless of where you're headed.
I agree. I think there is a much wider array of opportunity to meet all of the kind of requirements of teaching experience for a position than with the research. There are fewer pathways to reach that bar in terms of research. And I think having a rigorous academic research experience shows that you know how to think about science and do science, and you embody the identity of a scientist. So even if you go into a job that's focused on education or outreach or in any other field, there's a real value in holding that identity. And I think Robin's absolutely right. We have really amazing opportunities for our graduate students to develop pedagogical expertise. And I think just being able to pitch that, so taking advantage of those opportunities and sort of demonstrating teaching excellence, I think you can do that in many more ways than you can demonstrate excellence in research.
Yeah, and I'll just have I am muted. One more quick thing on that. I often view a lot of getting hired in particular, or like moving forward, as kind of building those tools in your toolbox. And so there's traditional ways to do that, like, you know, the hardcore sciences versus education. But, you know, I think, especially now, there's a lot more openings. We are getting into the process right now of hiring a lot of people that have worked for Microsoft or Facebook or Google, because they have these quantitative skills and can learn the biology or ecology on the job. So a lot of times I don't think there is the same. In the old days, you had to be in a certain lab, you had to be under a very famous professor to get to some of the higher opportunities, but I think that's changing.
Great.
I think that's a great segue into our next question. It's a question for everyone. What do you think set you apart from other applicants who also applied for your current position?
I'll start quickly. Mine was, I actually had a foot in the door. So I mean, I was able to get a postdoc with the federal lab I'm now working at that otherwise I would not have had. And I hate to say it, but a lot of times when I do see these opportunities, it are things like connections too. So I know people, that have got a particular faculty job because the search chair and their advisor went to the same, we're in the same department. That's one, obviously you can't control, but there's other ways to be, making strong connections with people, I think is really useful in getting tied into, helping find out about opportunities and getting that foot in the door.
For me, having relationships that allowed me to hit the ground running was really essential. That was more essential for the program building part of the job. I think most of the other applicants for my position, the teaching aspects, they could have come in at a similar point, but the fact that I had relationships with the environmental community locally meant that I was able to really highlight in a very specific way how I would be able to connect my students to these real world opportunities and capitalize on those relationships. So I think having an established network in the field and knowing how you can use that network and really highlighting that for any position is really valuable.
I'll say that I think two things were important. One is I did have established relationships already because I'd been working in a similar job, but it was a lecturer job instead of a teaching professor job. And I know that what set me apart was that I had basically been immersing myself fully in the teaching and the practice of teaching, the research of teaching. And so I think what set me apart was that it was clear that I was approaching teaching as I approached science. And that was something that we don't always see from other applicants when I've been sitting on these hiring committees. And I also just want to mention that these hiring committees have been really interesting to me because you really see a breadth of experience that applies for the jobs. And you tend to see them coming from either the hard sciences or from an education background. And in these committees, the hard science candidates tend to kind of rise up because they do speak the language. I have to say that's pretty important in these committees that I've sat on, and they've been in different departments. So not just biology, but also in chemistry. And so listening to the other regular research faculty that serve on the committees, that seems to be an important piece of it to them.
Great, thank you guys. I'm gonna ask one from the chat, but I'm gonna sort of combine two. And they are, one, is a postdoc always necessary for academic positions? And two, sorry, I'm losing it. Any advice, and this is sort of touched on in the chat, but any advice on applying for jobs while finishing a PhD, like not being graduated or having your certification, but being so close? And also just, sorry, a shout out to the chat where there's a lot of great information, especially about rejection. So take a look at that. So PhD, postdoc, are they necessary? And any advice for folks finishing their PhD and wanting to apply?
I posted a bit my thoughts in the chat, but I think pretty critical for a research focused position, and much more important that you maybe go somewhere else to establish yourself as really independent from your research advisor, and less important for a teaching position. Mostly it's the pedagogy experience, although folks who have degrees in science and have gone on to do an education postdoc or a pedagogy postdoc, they always get interviews when they apply for jobs. So that's really desirable if it's a pedagogy postdoc for a teaching position.
And I was going to say one thing really quickly on the postdoc side is it stinks. It's frustrating in that it's paid less than it probably should be. for the work. I think it's an underpaid position, but I will say that was one of the most fun times of my career, frankly, because you don't have all the BS of administration and you get to just dedicate yourself to research and answering research questions. So that's just one of these kind of, and there are kind of intermediate positions where, you know, I ended up going from a 1-year postdoc to a research position, research faculty type position almost immediately, because I wrote like 8 grants my first year and got some of those funded and was able to do that. So it's just a point to not fully dismiss them outright.
Okay. One more question from the chat. Trying to find ones that are sort of universal. Okay, how about if you all, this is a question for everybody, if you all could recommend top 1, 2, maybe 3 skills that you feel like you would look for if you were hiring your own position, whether they be professional, scientific, pedagogical skills that are important.
I get you quickly. 1 would be quantitative skills for what I do. 2 would be collaboration skills. Like the biggest thing is we don't want to, even if you're the most quantitative, but you don't work well with others, you're not going to work well in our group because we are a broad group.
I'll say that I think the thing that's most important in my job is, maybe it's not quite the skill, but more of a mindset. And that is, I do so much work with faculty development and grad student development that approaching that kind of work from a mindset of support and compassion is the key to success. And I'll say another skill about teaching in a minute, but this piece of it has been such a crucial shift, I think, in faculty development as a whole, but certainly personally for me. If we expect to change the culture of teaching, we have to recognize why it has not shifted before now. And that's because the people that are teaching classes are also writing grants, supporting graduate students, and doing research generally, and many of the R1s that we're thinking about, and also in other universities as well, of course. And so shifting to understanding that there's lots of desire to do a great job at teaching and to be equitable and to be inclusive and to have an impact, but you know, time is limited. And so in the role that I play in that part of, with that hat on, how can I help you is really the question that all of our work stems from. And I think that is very different than even 10 or 12 years ago in the way like teaching centers operated and the way faculty development operated, which was much more of a you know, not a supportive role, I'll say. And then in terms of teaching, I think, you know, I think that's where my science head really comes into play. I have intense curiosity about the world, which I'm sure most of you do too, which is why you're here. And I bring that to teaching. I have intense curiosity about how I can teach differently and better and how I can reach other people. And then I pair that with my curiosity about science. And that's what, you know, I love diving into the literature for 2 hours at night when I'm trying to write an exam question, right? And I'm like, oh, look at this cool thing I just found. And that's what keeps it exciting for me.
I think along those same lines, one thing that's really important is demonstrating your interest in continuing to learn. So using evidence-based practices, both in your research, whether it's developing quantitative skills, continuing to stay current in your field, or in teaching, that you're knowledgeable about evidence-based pedagogy, that you can like speak the language of that, really, that you can have those deep conversations, and especially knowing like what's on the forefront of that. So a lot of talk about like social justice pedagogy. I've had colleagues say like, if you don't use the words social justice pedagogy in your like teaching statement in the first paragraph, you won't get an interview at a Cal State right now. And these are people in like the sustainability environmental world. And so that's really like at the forefront of integrating like social and environmental justice. So I think knowing kind of like being right at the edge of where the field is going and being able to speak to that.
Wonderful. Well, we're just up against our time. I want to thank everybody who has come in for these amazing questions. I mean, the chat is like a library of FAQs already. And I just want to note that this has been recorded and will be posted on SCBNA. We can send out that link for folks. If you're interested in joining the student subcommittee and helping put on more of these, I'll put my email in the chat and contact me. And I really, really want to thank our amazing panelists. That was so useful. As somebody who is going in the job market soon, I can say that was like incredibly, enormously helpful. So Jessica, Robin, Elliott, thank you all sincerely for taking the time for this. We really, really appreciate it. And we'll see you at the next SCBNA Student Subcommittee webinar. Thanks, everybody.
Nice to meet you all. Bye.
I was just saying I'd be happy to speak for a couple more minutes. I don't know if we want to cut it off, but there was like one thread of questions that got a bunch of like arrows pointed to it, which is really how do you decide and approach a variety of different jobs in different fields, right? If you're applying for teaching jobs, but you also imagine being happy in an agency setting or in a nonprofit. And I was kind of in that position to apply to a lot of different jobs. And so I think, I wonder is, so Mira, okay, is Mira, you're still on. Okay, so you posed the question and then a bunch of people like highlighted it. But what I think is really important in that case is to be able to make the argument why each of those different jobs is really the one that you want. And that can be really hard to do when you're applying to so many different jobs, because it means that the materials that you prepare are going to be unique. And that's a lot of work, right? Where if you're applying to all jobs that are in the same, a lot of jobs that are in the same area, then you're able to really craft and hone those materials because you're using the same kinds of things over and over again. I think also just building relationships with organizations. I mean, there are a lot of jobs that are advertised broadly where there's sort of already somebody who has a foot in the door. And of course, that's no guarantee because we all have to follow you know, these equitable and open hiring practices. But I would say keep trying and don't be afraid to follow up when you don't get an interview and don't get a job offer, and ask for a conversation and be very gracious. Like, this is a learning experience for me and this is the kind of job I want. Can you tell me what will make me more competitive? What could I do to be more competitive next time? And I think you can get some really good information that way. All right, sorry, I'm not following the rules, Mel.
No, that was great. Oh my God.
You can kick me out, but I related a lot to that question.
I mean, we only benefit. No, we want your time, but I feel bad taking it. Yeah, thank you so much. That was super, super valuable.
All right, take care, everyone.
Okay, bye.